Hey everyone, this is your host MP Rose and welcome to Storm Revelations. Today's topic is about attachments. We're going to talk about what an attachment is, how our attachment forms, the different types of attachments we can develop, and what does that mean when we develop a particular attachment? How does that relate to how we connect to other people and the relationships that we end up forming? So basically, an attachment is a lasting psychological connection between human beings. It's sort of like an emotional bond that we formed. And this is basically established during infancy with the primary caregiver based on the primary caregiver's levels of sensitivity and responsiveness to the psychological and physiological need of the child. And attachments are also formed based on other social relationships that the child and infant end up developing with other people around them. So the attachment is basically a repetitive act of attached behaviors or attached transaction. And this is a continuing process of seeking and maintaining a certain level of closeness of proximity to a specific individual. And this particular attachment theory or attachment concept was formed by Bowlby in 1969. Later on in 1978, Mary Ainsworth ended up developing or discovering three major types of attachment that an infant can develop. Her study was called Stranger Situation. And she took 1-year-old infants and she put them in an unfamiliar environment with his or her mother and allowed that infant to freely explore the environment while a stranger entered the room and gradually approached the infant. While that is occurring, the mother is leaving the room and allows the infant to spend some time with the stranger to see how comfortable each infant was being physically further away from their mother in an unfamiliar environment, how the infant interacted with the stranger, and how the infant greeted the mother upon returning back into the room. And based on her observation, she came up with three specific types of attachment. The first attachment was avoidant attachment. And basically, this type of attachment, the infant showed no distress during the separation from the mother. The interaction with the stranger was very similar to the interaction with the mother. And there was a slight avoiding or turning away or avoiding eye contact once the mother returned into the room and reunited with the infant. Now, this attachment was formed because a defense mechanism against the mother's rejecting behaviors was basically created by the infant, and the infant internalized this concept. And the parent basically ignored attempts of intimacy with the child, and the child basically internalized a belief that they could not depend on the relationship with the mother. So, how does this translate into adult behaviors? Well, basically, someone that has an avoidant or a dismissive avoidant attachment as an adult holds a very positive self-image of themselves, but regards others in a very negative image. And so this type of relationship is basically very close when it comes to having relationships with themselves. So these particular individuals, they prefer to avoid close relationships and intimacy with other people in order for them to maintain a sense of independence and invulnerability. And these particular individuals also generally view other people as being untrustworthy, and they deny experiencing any distress associated with relationships, and they typically downplay the importance of connecting with someone. Now, romantically, these individuals fear intimacy. Their emotions Their emotions are usually high and low, and these are the individuals that tend to be extremely jealous. They're very unsure of their relationship when it comes to their romantic partner. They believe that love rarely lasts, and they feel like it's very hard for them to actually fall in love. Now, the second group that was discovered is called secure attachment. And with these particular infants, the stranger may or may not have been friendly, or the infant may or may not have been friendly with the stranger. But the thing with the infant is that they interacted with the mother and they seeked and maintained proximity to the mother during the reunion phase. And they showed slight distress when the mother left the room and when they were separated, even though they didn't necessarily cry. Now, what does this mean? This typically means that these are the individuals that have less anxiety and have more positive attitudes towards relationship. And they're the ones who believe that their mothers responded to their needs the way they should have responded to their needs. Now, what's the result of the interaction? They have positive self-image towards themselves, and they also have positive self-image towards others. So they feel a sense of worthiness, and they also have an expectation that other people are generally accepting and will respond to their needs. And they basically experience, even if they experience negative related events or attachments, they're able to objectively assess people and events and assign positive generalized values to what happened. So these are the individuals that instead of looking at things with a glass half empty mindset, they look at it with a glass half full mindset. Now, what does it mean in terms of romance and how these individuals interact romantically? Well, these individuals tend to be happy and trusting towards their partners, despite their partner's fault. They tend to be in long-lasting romantic relationships, and they basically have this idea or concept that love would never fade, even though they may go through their ups and downs. The third type of attachment that was discovered is called ambivalent attachment. Ambivalent or somewhat resistance. These particular infants basically demonstrated signs of resisting interaction with the mother when she entered into the room and came back. Once they ended up having contact with the mother, the infant basically showed a form of disinterest or confusion. This is caused when an infant learns that the caregiver or the parent is unreliable and does not consistently respond towards their needs. Now, as far as relationship goes, these are the adults who are overly concerned with the uncertainty of their relationship. They hold a negative self-image towards themselves, but they view others as being positive. They have a sense of feeling unworthiness, but generally evaluate others in a positive way, just not themselves. They strive for self-acceptance by attempting to gain approval and validation from the relationships that they get themselves involved with when it comes to their significant others. They also rely highly on high levels of contact and intimacy from relationships from others. And they're pretty much preoccupied with dependency. And these are the individuals who kind of struggle and may have a dependency type of relationship with their parents. And so romantically, they basically are very easy to fall in love. They also claim that unfading love is very difficult to find. They typically have an obsessive type of mindset, and they get into an obsessive type of relationship pattern. The desire for reciprocation and union is generally very high. Their emotions are typically high and low. And these are the people who have very extreme high sense of sexual attraction and very high sense of jealousy towards their partners as well. Now, there's a fourth type of attachment that was discovered much later on by Main and Solomon, and this occurred in 1986. And basically, both of them repeated this type of strange study that Ainsworth did, and they discovered that some infants didn't fall in either of the three categories that were described. Instead, a fourth category was discovered called disorganized, aka fearful avoidant attachment. And people who fall in this category typically experience childhood trauma or very extreme inconsistency when it comes to their needs being met as a child or growing up. Now, don't get this confused, because this particular attachment is not a mixture of avoidant and ambivalent, but rather these individuals never actually develop real coping strategies and are basically unable to deal with the real world situations. Some signs to look for disorganized attachments are feelings of depression and extreme anxiety, frequent outbursts and erratic behaviors, very poor self-esteem and self-hatred. And basically, they have trauma type relationships that form, and they struggle to form healthy attachments with their own children, and they go through this cycle of dysfunction. People with this particular type of attachment is a type of insecure attachment, and they basically have trouble making connections with others. They can be aggressive and very unpredictable when it comes to their expression of love towards other people. And this is basically rooted in the lack of consistent love and affection that they experience during their childhood. Now, just to summarize some of the characteristics of the different attachments that we talked about. Now, insecure attachment, a child can be separated from their parents. They seek comfort from the parent. When frightened, they greet the parent when the parent returns with positive emotions, and they prefer the parent to the stranger. Now, as an adult, they end up developing trusting, lasting relationships. They tend to have good self-esteem. They share their feelings with their parents and friends, and they seek out social support. With ambivalent attachment characteristics, as a child, they may be weary of strangers. They become greatly distressed when the parent leaves. They don't appear to be comforted by the parent when the parent returns. As an adult, they're reluctant to become close to others. They worry that their partner do not love them, and they become very distraught when the relationship ends. Now, with avoidant attachment characteristics, as a child, the child may avoid the parent. They don't seek much contact or comfort from that parent, and they show little to no preference for the parent over strangers. As an adult, they may have problems with intimacy. They may invest in little emotion. They may invest very little emotionally and social and romantic relationships, and they're unwilling or unable to share their feelings with others. When it comes to disorganized attachments, the child shows a mixture of avoidance and resistant behavior. They become very confused and apprehensive. And later on, even as they grow up, they may take on the parental role, and some children may actually act like the caregiver towards the parent, where the child is the parent parenting the child. So, how does all of this relate to us and how we interact with people? You learned a whole bunch of information about the 4 different types of attachments that we can actually develop as adults. Now, the prime thing to remember is that your attachments basically forms your identity. Whatever attachments you end up developing, you develop a heart towards that concept and you develop a mindset towards that concept. And in the end, the way you feel and the way you think ultimately influence how you behave and the things that you are or are not willing to actually participate in. So, as you know, trauma is one of those things that can deviate or change and add on to the type of interactions that we have with others and individuals. And a lot of things come into play. Science doesn't really understand why one child develops one attachment versus the other when both child grew up in similar environments. So a child that experienced violence and that was sexually molested, or that have seen domestic violence towards them, or have seen acts of crimes occur within their neighborhoods or where they grew up, you may have 2 kids or 2 children that actually experience the same thing, but one develop disorganized attachment while the other may develop, say, avoidant, or may actually develop a secure attachment later on. Now, life happens, and the Bible tells us that it rains on people who do good things and it rains on people who do bad things. Vice versa, the sun shines on people who do good things just like the sun shines on people who do bad things. So basically, life happens. Good and bad things will happen to us all, regardless of what we believe in, regardless of whether or not we believe there's a God or not. Good and bad things will happen to us all. Okay? Now, the way we interpret those things that occur to our lives depends on how our parents brought us up. Now, God has a particular characteristic about him, and God designed us a particular way. Now, God created us to be able to look at certain cues, and we use our instincts as parents to respond to those cues. And this is the same thing that happens with a child as a child forms a relationship with their parents. The same thing with us, or as individuals, when we end up interacting with people in our environment as well. We pick up on cues, and based on our primal instinct, we respond to those cues. He also gave us, God, when I say he, I mean God, also gave us hormones that facilitate bonding. Because one of the very first things that a mother does, or she's given the option to actually do, is to breastfeed. And breastfeeding is one of those quick ways of actually getting that bond and that attachment with that child. And God also created or allows women, if they remain in a lactation phase or in a phase of continuous breastfeeding, they may end up experiencing something called lactation-induced amenorrhea, which is basically, as long as that woman continues to breastfeed, she's not going to have her period. So there isn't going to be a period where she actually ovulates. So this allows her to space out her kids. So the longer she breastfeeds, the longer she can engage in this absence of period, which will allow her not to end up having another child. Now, by design, babies cry, and them crying basically is a way of signaling that they have a particular need that needs to be met. And as a parent, a mother, a father, that parent basically physiologically and psychologically responds. They basically pick up the child and they comfort the infant, and they make the infant feel safe and secure. And the infant in return knows that the mother is nearby. So every time, if that parent is consistent and providing for that child need, this is where the secure attachment comes in. Now, as Christians, we often look at the interactions that we have with the people that are around us, and we don't realize that the attachments that we have or that we experience during our childhood through our teenage years bleeds into how we interact with the people who are around us. So the mindsets that we develop and the emotions and the affections that are linked to that influences our behavior. And in Ephesians, it talks about how a child is to obey their parents, for this is the right thing to do. However, a few verses later on, it says for fathers not to irritate, anger their children. Instead, bring them up in the training and discipline of the Lord. So how do you get someone to actually grow and be disciplined and trained? You are, as a parent, have to do it. So if you, as a parent, you're not training your child in the way that they should go and how to follow God, then the amount of interpretation and interaction that they have with the people around them and the attachment traumas or the events that happen in their lives, it's harder for them to process, and it makes it a whole lot more difficult for that child to actually looking at the glass half full instead of half empty. And it's easy to take away from their self-esteem. It's easy to take away from the positive perspective that they have on individuals that comes into their lives. So we do have to bring our children and train them and discipline them in God's concepts. And by doing that, we can diminish the blows that life throws at them so that they can develop strategic coping skills so that they're able to function and develop pretty well and normalize interactions and relationships with the people who are around them, whether it's romantic, whether it's co-worker relationship when it comes to work. It doesn't matter what form of relationship it is. The point is they can end up forming secure attachments instead of insecure attachments. Now, the only secure attachment is exactly that, secure attachments. All the other attachments that we talked about are basically insecure types of attachments. So we teach our kids to basically obey. Now, nobody really can force anybody to obey anyone. And we need to understand that we basically comply, or our kids basically comply with our instructions. But true obedience comes from the heart. And that sort of obedience is not something that you can demand or force upon someone. It's something that develops and arises through a love and trusting relationship, which is why that child will be able to connect with you, because you're able to instruct them on the things that they should not do and the things that they need to engage in so that they can develop healthy type of relationships and connection with the people that they come across. Because if they cannot form that secure bond with you as a parent, and if you yourself don't know or did not experience that type of secure, trusting and loving relationship with your parents, it's going to be hard for you to pass that along and teach your kids. the same thing, especially if you're not looking to break that cycle. So the key thing is that we need to be able to break that cycle. We need to be able to respond sensitively to the needs of our kids and allow them and teach them to seek ways to build and strengthen that trust and love type of relationship that needs to first start with the parent, because that relationship transfers over to every other aspect of their lives. Now, let's go back and talk about God's character just a little bit. Now, God answers to our cry, and you can read that in Genoa 2 verse 2. God draws us with loving kindness, and that's in Jeremiah 31:3. God is slow to anger and rich in love. You can find that in Psalms 145 verse 8. And in Isaiah 66:13, God gives us comfort as a mother comforts a child. You see how important that connection is, that even a biblical reference is made towards that, because that's the type of comfort and that's the type of love that God has for us. And this is the same exact type of love that we need to display to our kids as they grow up. And he also has compassion on us, because it tells us in Psalms 103 verse 13, fathers should have compassion on their children. And of course, God leads us towards repentance. And you can find that in Romans 2 verse 4. So thank you very much for joining. I'm just going to go ahead and leave you with this passage in 1 Thessalonians 2 verse 7. It says, but we proved to be gentle among you as a nursing mother, tenderly caring for her children. I'm going to repeat that one more time. This is found in 1 Thessalonians 2 verse 7. It states, but we proved to be gentle among you as a nursing mother, tenderly caring for her own children. So I want you to think about this whole attachment and how we form attachments. Look at yourself and look at the experiences you've had. Look at the interactions that you've been through. Which attachment best describes you? Jot it down, write it down, and think about things that you can do in order to get away from that attachment. What are some of the things that you need to do that you're not doing? And what are some things that you can work towards in order to improve things such as your mindset when it comes to the positive perspective that you have on other people? Or it can be that you look at other people negatively. So what are some of the things that you can do in order to view people in a more positive light? Maybe you're not trusting. Maybe you're very jealous and very dependent on other people, and you seek others' approval. What are some things that you can do in order to change that mindset, to change the behavior? And let me tell you, changing behavior is not the easiest thing to do. It is very, very, very difficult. As a matter of fact, the only person that can change behavior is God. And when we come into God's presence, we tend to hold on to all of that identity that we attach to ourselves and we connected to based on all of the life experiences that we've had. And that basically prevents us from walking into our purpose. So within the next few episodes, we're going to talk about exactly that, and we're going to relate it to biblical characters and exactly what they did and the attachments and the identities that they kind of linked to themselves, and how they had to kind of let go of that and allow God to fully take over so that they were able to do some of the purposeful things that God asked them to actually do. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Leave your comments at the bottom. Let me know what you thought about this video. If you have any topics you would like me to talk about, please feel free to reach out. You can also reach out to me at rb.stormrevelations@gmail.com. So if you want to email me personally, you can. We can have email discussions. I'll probably be open to possibly doing some consultations as well later on down the line. But in the meantime, if you don't feel comfortable spilling it or getting personal, then you can always reach out to me personally. Again, that email is rb.stormrevelations@gmail.com. Thank you very much for joining. I will see you next time. God bless. Bye.